Diwali. Which is, it's the big Hindu holiday. It's like our version of Kwanzaa. Only it's a lot older. You guys familiar with Kwanzaa? Kwanzaa is a Pan-African holy day that was made up in the 60s by somebody who was trying to give the black community worldwide, but especially in the U.S., a holiday they could make their own. And so he syncretistically, you guys know what syncretism is? You know what syncretism is?
To like sync up situations?
No. No, nice try. Syncretism is a term used in philosophy and in religion for when somebody eclectically puts together different traditions or different philosophical ideas that generally, ultimately don't go together, but because they're putting them together in a very superficial way, for people who don't know anything about the tradition, it might make sense and seem to be a coherent form of eclecticism. Be a coherent form of eclecticism, although I've never used that term before. But when you dig in, you find that there's core. Like you get people who eat meat, but they love their dogs. Like, I'm an animal lover while they're eating a steak. And you're like, how are you an animal lover? I got like 3 dogs and 2 cats and several fish and a bird. But they are eating animals. And then you say to them, well, wait a second. Do you know that the animals you're eating are at least as sophisticated, able to feel pain, and have just as much worth by any reasonable criteria that you could come up with. But you've just arbitrarily chosen to consume these animals and think of them as commodities and then protect and love these animals and call them pets. Do you follow that? And it reveals the deep dissonance and incompatibility of those two belief systems, which at least on the surface might appear to be reasonable, that you eat meat and love animals. But when you dig in just a little bit, it doesn't work. Does that make sense? I don't know if I'm planning on posting to Instagram one of these days, but it's a little too gregarious for me. It's not like my speed on Instagram is a little sober, and so. But there's a duo, a comedic duo called Cheech and Chong. You guys familiar with them? I grew up watching Cheech and Chong, and I mean, when I grew up, it wasn't just that you watched Cheech and Chong, you could actually buy a record. You remember this? You could actually buy a Cheech and Chong record, and it was them speaking on the record. And so you wouldn't, if you weren't watching them on TV, you could listen to them doing their thing on a record. You follow? Doing stand-up comedy. I remember, I think it's Tommy Chong, was doing a whole thing on Quaaludes, which is another drug that nobody knows about unless it's like went out of style. It's a downer that was extremely popular in the 70s and 80s, but went out of style. I think they still manufacture them in Mexico, but the original company that made them went out of business, so it's no longer manufactured in the U.S., but I think that they still manufacture them in Mexico, and so if you want to get Quaaludes, you can drive south of the border, and I believe they're still available from pharmacies down there. I don't know how I know that, But but I'm about 98% certain that's a fact. Anyway, he did the whole thing on Quaaludes. But I was thinking about, there's this, I can't remember which one it was, but anyway, they were drug dealers on the Santa Monica Pier, not on the pier, but on the, I don't know what it's called, the bluffs, the Santa Monica Bluffs. My grandfather actually used to play cards. He lived half a block from the Santa Monica Bluffs, North Santa Monica. It's a very, very nice place. And he would just go, and there's a beautiful bluffs that you can walk along, like Long Beach, but just, like a step up in terms of the demographic. It's a real bougie part of town. So they were there selling drugs out of an ice cream truck. Do you remember this scene? Anyway, they started playing a song to pass the time. And the song was Save the Whales. You know the song? Okay. Anyway, I'm going to post it. Save the whales. Pretty mama, save them whales. And when you're done saving the whales, you go out and shoot the seals. Save the whales and shoot the seals. And he's like, and if you don't like me saying shoot the seals, you can save your breath. And they're singing the song. It's hilarious. And Tommy Chong is playing like a blues, 12-bar blues guitar, and then Cheech is rapping over it, and those are the lines. So I was going to post that on Instagram with the caption that says, actual footage of someone trying to piece together a coherent argument for loving animals while eating meat. To point to the sheer ambiguity of it and the dissonance required, and the incompatibility of it, and the cognitive dissonance it requires, and the ability to just kind of turn your brain off to be able to love animals, exemplified by the term save the whales, and then eat them, shoot the seals. And so actually cognitive dissonance creates a big problem for people, big mental problems, because your two very, very deeply held beliefs are shown to be in contrast with one another, and you feel like you're breaking apart on the inside. And so generally speaking, the way you resolve it is you either dumb yourself down, stupefy yourself, or you give up one of your values. You give up one of your values. Because usually by the time cognitive dissonance arises, those things are truly at odds with each other in a way that you won't be able to reconcile harmoniously. You'll require to jettison one of the beliefs. And this creates the meat paradox, which is it's been studied in a number of university studies. People's incredible discomfort with eating meat when they're confronted with the reality that they're actually eating an animal. There's a bunch of experiments. I'm not going to go into them now. But syncretism is when you sync up two ideas or more, but generally they don't go together. And so they only work if you don't know anything about them. Like Wikipedia is great unless you really know about a subject. And then you find it to be lacking, and you end up like on a more serious Wikipedia, like the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which gives you a way more in-depth and legitimate. It's scholars writing for scholars. And the entries are much more voluminous, and they're much more comprehensive. And you usually get the idea that somebody wrote their master's thesis on a subject and it got included. You probably get credit, for writing a master's thesis by contributing something to that website. And I'm imagining they're not just open to editing. by any Tom, Dick, or Hoodie. And so I'm thinking you probably have to be an expert in the field, and there has some peer revision that goes on and like that. That's a syncretism. How did I bring up syncretism? Kwanzaa, yeah. They're taking a bunch of African traditions and throwing them together. It never really took off. It was just some guy's thing. He tried to make it, you know what I mean? It was like the 60s. It was like a black power time. The civil rights movement was in full effect. And this guy got this cool idea. It's kind of right. You can't just whip up a Hanukkah or something like that. Or a Christmas. It requires a little more collective bargaining. It takes a little more time. And it never really took off. And how do we know it didn't really take off? Because most of you had never heard of Kwanzaa. Raise your hands if you've never heard of Kwanzaa before. All right, so most of you have. All right, so it took off enough. So Diwali is kind of, it's like the token Hindu holiday. So the black people have Kwanzaa and the Jewish people have Hanukkah, and the Christians have Christmas. But Christmas is like legit. If you're from the U.S. anyway, Christmas is an actual holiday. Those other ones are kind of for these minority groups because we got to be nice to them. But the real holiday in this country is Christmas. You can just ask Donald Trump. He said he was going to bring back Merry Christmas because the liberals had destroyed it, changed it up for Happy Holidays. So you can show your Americanness. You can show you're American by defiantly, when somebody says Happy Holidays, you say Merry Christmas. Are you guys? I mean, I'm not making this up. Trump had a Merry Christmas thing. He was on a rant about it. Not that that's surprising or unusual, but that was one of his many rants over the years. There's a war on Christmas going on that just somehow or other nobody knows about, but it's there. It's like these invisible leprechauns, and they're killing elves left and right in the Akashic record. Have you ever heard that term, Akashic record? That just means somebody made it up. Akash means ether or space. And so when you say the Akashic record, it's just a fancy way of saying, I made it up. But I want to legitimate what I'm doing. What's going on?
He's saying it's not on.
That's one. The next phone.
It's on.
All right, then ignore these guys. Just mind your own business, fellas. All right, how about that? And then, you good?
Wait. No.
They were right?
Yeah.
Forgive me. Yeah, when people say it's in the Akashic record, you've heard that, right? It just means somebody made it up. Whenever somebody says it to me, I go, oh, so you made it up? They're like, no, it's from the Akashic record. I'm like, that means you made it up. You understand Akash means space. It's in the space record. Like, what does that mean? Like there's a library out in space that nobody can see except for you, and then your teachings come down from there. It's just, it's a cheesy way to try to authenticate something. So anyway, Diwali has a fairly long history. You find Diwali spoken about in Sanskrit texts, which are at least 1,500 to 2,000 years old. So we don't know how far back it goes, but it goes back a ways. And foreign travelers, Chinese travelers who came to India for trade, write about Diwali, and Islamic travelers who came through write about Diwali. And it shows up, in secular dramas as well. from around the turn of the millennium. It shows up. So it's been around for a while. We don't generally celebrate Diwali. Srila Prabhupada said we don't have anything to do with Diwali. We don't celebrate Diwali or Durga Puja. Diwali in Bengal, where Prabhupada hailed from, is celebrated as Kali Puja. Kali Puja is like legitimately trippy. They actually kill goats and sacrifice them on an altar. The priest will go and get the sword. Kali holds a sword in her hand, the deity, and he'll go and get the sword from the deity and go and hack a goat. I've never seen it, but I know for sure it happens. And so I'm not sure whether they hack the head off the goat, they slit the goat's throat. I don't know the exact details. But it's like, I've seen they have these little, you see it especially in rural Bengal, but also in Kali temples in India. You'll see it's a little stick that comes out of the ground and then it's forked. I can do a Y. And you stick the goat's neck there and then you chop it. I'm pretty sure they cut the head off. And then they offer that blood sacrifice. Like Indiana Jones types, and Temple of Doom type stuff. Like legitimately you're like, that's freaky. You know how we pour water on the people that we offer on the altar? They do that with blood. They throw blood off the altar. Which, has, I don't know what your reaction was to that, but I kind of have a dual, repulsion or repugnance. On one hand, I'm thinking, that's super nasty to kill an animal and throw their blood on people. That's super culty and trippy. But on the other hand, I'm also just thinking, wow, that's extremely unhygienic. And that sounds really unhealthy. Did you have that same reaction? Like above and beyond the macabre and the goriness of it, there's just the straight up lack of, health considerations. So Prabhupada's familiarity with Diwali was largely informed by his growing up in Bengal in a Vaishnava tradition. The two main religions in Bengal are Vaishnavism, our tribe, and Kali worship. And so those two groups are really distinct entities. They're two very different groups. And so Prabhupada said, we have nothing to do with this Diwali, Lakshmi Puja, Durga Puja. We celebrate Govardhan Puja, which is tomorrow. And so I probably fielded 25 or 30 phone calls, say, at the temple, of people asking if we were doing something for Diwali. And I said, we're doing something tomorrow. And they were bummed or depressed or sad. A ton of people came to the temple today that we took care of. Every year that we don't do Diwali, I think, we got to celebrate Diwali. Because so many people in our community, especially in North India, it's a very big day. It is the biggest holiday of the year. I mean, they spend almost $1 billion a year just on fireworks for Diwali. Which isn't that much money. There's 1 billion people in India, so it's $1 a person, but it's still it's a tiny sum. If you spread it out like that, it's not that much, but it's still a significant amount of money. And I mean, it's crazy. Diwali in India is absolutely. You've never been to India, so you don't know. You've been for Diwali? Oh, you have, okay. I don't know where I got the idea you've never been to India. Diwali's crazy in India, right? It's dangerous. The fireworks? I mean, imagine if every single house in a city purchased large amount of illegal fireworks that were way more powerful than they should be. And then they launch them from their roofs or on the street. And I mean, when I say dangerous, I've seen it. You can buy like a half a stick of dynamite, like an M500, no problem, on the streets of India as a 3-year-old. Like if you've got the money, they'll give you an M500. And so you've got kids throwing dynamite around. I mean, it's not exactly that bad, but it's not much better. So you've got adults doing the kind of fireworks displays that should only be done by a city government with the fire department present. And then you've got a bunch of children with like really dangerous fireworks. Like stuff you cannot buy in the US without a license. And it's a free-for-all. People are just chucking fireworks the entire night. It's hellish, actually. You can't sleep. The air is totally polluted. It's a nightmare. I mean, literally, the whole night, there's bombs going off all around you. What city did you grow up in? Hyderabad. It's like this in Hyderabad, right? It's terrible, right? You can't sleep. And you're just up all night. That's kind of what Diwali has degraded to. And then there's another major constituent of the festival, which is that everybody gives each other sweets. That's a huge thing. That's another massive business. I don't know what the Indian population spends on sweets, but it's a pretty penny. And so everybody's giving each other sweets. So everybody's getting fat on way too much sugar. You know? And sweets in India can get dangerous. That's another thing people don't realize. You know, dairy, like sweets made out of dairy in India, you'll see it every like year. I would see in the newspaper, 50 people died at a wedding because they served some bad milk sweets. And I've eaten bad milk sweets in India. I ate some rubbery once. Rubbery's kind of it's an unusual sweet. You cook down milk and you allow a skin to form on top of the milk, and then once the skin forms, you mix that back into the milk. So it's like clotted cream is what the equivalent is. Clotted cream, which still to this day, 30 years later, I cannot eat. I don't eat dairy anyway, but if from our cow we decide to make clotted cream, I wouldn't be able to do it. From our own ahimsa cows. Because I got sick eating some rubbery in 1991 in Vrindavan on Vrajmala Parikrama, probably around this time. It was Ekadasi. It was the final Ekadasi, so it's, about 2 weeks. Yeah, and I guess like 11 days from today. And so I think it's not Bhaima Ekadasi, but I can't remember what the day is. Uttara Ekadasi, Uttana Ekadasi, the Ekadasi of liberation. And so they had a Ekadasi in India instead of being a day of fasting. You know what we do on Ekadasi, right? We don't eat grains or beans. And so given that you're vegan, not eating grains or beans definitely throws a spanner in the works. And you're not eating a whole lot. It's like a carb day, And so it's kind of rough. Or you eat a bunch of nuts, which is just like, makes you feel gross. Speaking of which, have you ever eaten popcorn and not felt gross afterwards? I've never in my life eaten popcorn and not regretted it. Somebody recently described it to me as sharp air. Right? I've never eaten popcorn and not been like, that sucks afterwards. Anyway, on Ekadasi, generally speaking, in India, they have fun. And usually it's a feast day. And so you'll have about twice as many preparations for lunch as you normally do. And they got all sorts of cool stuff they do. So one thing they do is they do sabudana, which is a savory thing made with tapioca pearls, like boba, but salty as a savory dish. So I ate some sabudana, which I still to this day cannot eat. And I ate some rubbery, and the rubbery was bad. And if you get sick right away and vomit right away, no big deal. You vomit, you clear your gullet, and you're good to go. If it takes you like 8 hours to get sick, then you might die. So this is one of those. I ate and then woke up the next day and was dying, like laying on the side of the road, vomiting, and doing number 2, and like thinking I was actually going to die. Like it was gnarly. Hit our whole crew because we got some bad milk. So when they're like, oh, there's some bad milk sweets served at this wedding and everybody died, it's like, it seems crazy and almost like, you got to be kidding me. But no, I've been through it. It happens. So anyway, people are eating a ton of milk sweets, getting fat, hopefully not sick, and then blowing their hands off with fireworks. That's what Diwali has become. However, the day does go back quite a ways, and it has some pretty significant religious significance for people of India. And it's become really popular for diaspora Indians, for NRIs, non-resident India, the diaspora population that's spread out around the world because it's a way to hold on to a little bit of their culture. And so, like I remember seeing, they were having like a barbecue, a Hindu barbecue in Trinidad to celebrate the holidays. Let me just say that again. A Hindu barbecue. Where they were cooking meat to celebrate the holy day. Because, they were indentured servants. They went over to Trinidad. They were treated not as bad as the black people who were treated as chattel, as property. But the Indians went over a little bit later, once slavery was abolished, and they did the indentured servitude thing, which, they were definitely second-class citizens for a generation. And then they settled there, and so they lost most of their culture, but they held on to little bits and pieces, and, you find this all over the world, in Thailand and Japan. Diwali kind of made the cut. It was a way to hold on to a little piece of home. So, yeah, anyway, that's the secularization, like we could critique Christianity and the way Christmas is celebrated in the same way. So the same critique could be leveled at Diwali. But the origin of the festival, which is what I think we'll talk about a little bit today, is quite interesting. Diwali is a harvest festival because people have raised crops, and those crops are stored away for the winter season. And so it's a time of jubilation before winter fully kicks in. And it's also the end of the Indian fiscal year, traditionally. I don't know if they still do this, but traditionally, hundreds of years ago, the fiscal year would end and begin anew during the 5 days of Diwali, on Diwali day itself. And then you would clean your home, and there was, like some ghosts and goblins you thought were hanging around, so you worship Hanuman or another deity to kind of clear that out, and then you clean your home, and you buy new pots and pans and new utensils for the house. Husbands buy gifts for their wives. You buy sweets for your neighbors. You decorate your whole house inside and outside with lamps, and you have gifts of food with your neighbors. And so there's Dhanteras, which is the first day. That was a couple days back. And that's when you're buying new pots and pans, cleaning your house, finishing your records for the year. And then Dhanteras. And then you have Narak Chaturdasi, which celebrates Krishna killing Narakasura and liberating 16,000 kidnapping victims who were being held captive. And then, so that happened on Narak Chaturdasi. It's celebrated a little differently in different places. And then today, which is Diwali, the big day, and then tomorrow is Govardhan Puja. And then finally you have Bhai Dooj, which is a kind of a thing you do for your brother. You feed your brother with your hand. It's like Raksha Bandhan, which is another Hindu holiday where you tie a thing that shows your affection for your brother around his wrist. And so this is similar to that. Those are the 5 days. Most people don't rigorously observe these 5 days. Did you growing up? No. It's Diwali. And then sometimes, depending on where you're from, they might have another 1 or 2 that they add in. But these 5 are, it's kind of a looking at, the traditional way it was done and the way it might be done. You could say almost like orthodox. But it's not quite that simple because these days become orthodox in different regions. And so you can't quite say you have to do all 5. Like Govardhan Puja is also known as Bali Pratipad, which is the day Vamana conquered over Bali Maharaj. And so there's different, and then Dhanteras is also known as Yama Deep, which is a festival like kind of warding off death. And so each day has a few variations on how it's celebrated in different areas of India, and then some days aren't celebrated at all. And this is, the Jains celebrate, the Buddhists, at least some sects of Buddhism, the Nira Buddhists celebrate it also. Instead, it's in Nepal, and like I said, I've been in Japan for Diwali, and Thailand also celebrates Diwali, and so does Fiji, and Indonesia, and Trinidad, kind of wherever there are Indians living outside the country, they celebrate. I'm sure it's pretty big in the UAE, right? Dubai you're from, right? And I'm sure it's big in Kenya. Wherever there's a strong Indian population. Indians settle in Kenya. There's a big Indian population in Kenya and also in Dubai. It's cleansing, it's a new year, wrapping up your books, buying new items, especially for the kitchen, giving gifts of food, warding off evil, celebrating the harvest. It's pretty generic stuff when you think it's pretty old world, agrarian type stuff. And then somehow the fireworks get thrown in there. Some sort of extension. This lighting of the lamps is a big part. Deepa, Deepavali. And Avali is a collection of something. And Deepa is the lamp. And so Deepavali became Diwali. And so that's the literal name of the festival means a row of lamps or a group of lamps, a collection of lamps. Gitavali is a collection of songs. Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote a songbook called Gitavali. One of our saints wrote a songbook called Gitavali. And sometimes they say Avali means row, but that's actually not quite correct. Mala means row. Avali is like a collection, usually not like in any particular order. And so the Deepavali, it generally traces back to 2 ideas. One is that the Pandavas, Arjun, the hero of the Gita, and his 4 brothers were sent exiled for 14 years. And the day they came back, everyone was so happy to have them back that they lit lamps to welcome them home. And then the other one, which is probably more popular of the 2 ideas of where the lamps come from, is that when Ram returned to Ayodhya after liberating Sita from the clutches of Ravan, when they re-entered Ayodhya, their capital, the residents of Ayodhya were so happy to see them that they put out lamps to welcome them home. And in South India, you're from South, they do Rangoli. You don't see that so much in North India. You guys know what Rangoli is? Your family must do this too, right? Rangoli is you get rice, powdered rice flour, mixed with various colors. So you end up with this colored powder. and then you make elaborate designs outside your home, yantras and stuff like that. And it's considered to be like it's perishable art. Like you see those Buddhists who do those like those elaborate sand sculptures, and then they just like get rid of them, like to show the temporalness of the world. And so it's kind of a Tibetan Buddhist thing. So Rangoli is a little similar in that it doesn't last for long. But most Indian women in South India specifically, they are good at making Rangoli. And every festival, and especially on Diwali, they'll put these beautiful, sometimes extremely elaborate designs outside their home. Sometimes they'll do footprints as if someone's walking into their home. Have you ever seen that? You've been to South India?
Yeah.
You seen that? Have you seen the footprints? It's really nice. They're telling anybody who walks by, come to my home. People don't actually do it, but they're making it clear, like I'm inviting anybody into my home. Like everybody's a guest in my home. When we were in South, we'd go in people's homes. Sometimes we'd just walk in and lay down and chill out, and then people would come home and they'd be sadhus have come to our home and they cook for us. If it was hot out, it's too hot out, we just go into a house. Let me just say what I said again. If we were walking through a village and it was too hot in South India, we would literally just walk into what we could see as a Vaishnav house. We would just walk in and sit down. And if people were there, they'd let us in. But if they weren't there, if they were out in the fields or something working, we would just go and chill. And then they would come home and find us and then be super nice to us and cook for us. It's this atiti devo bhav, this sentiment that the uninvited guest is the Lord himself coming to their home. It's like a really unique feature. I experienced a little bit of the same thing in rural Mexico, to be quite honest. This was many decades ago. But I haven't really experienced anywhere else in the world in the way I have in rural India, where people are just overjoyed to give you every last thing they have. When they try to cook for you, it's like in the morning time when we go to beg at houses sometimes, we go and beg and to get breakfast. And they try to give you all the food in their house, but they only cook once. So if you let them give you all their food, and I could easily eat 10, 15 chapatis, which is what they made for the whole house. And then they'd have nothing left. And so they were always trying to give you all the food they had. And they'd always lie and be like, no, we'll cook more. We're just about to cook more. We have more in the back. But they're lying. People are poor. They've just got enough to make for one meal. And if you eat their food, then they're done. Then they wait till dinner to eat. So you got to go and you got to beg in a respectful way, where you take just a little bit of food from each house. They call it madhukari, which means to do what a bee does. Madhu means bee. So you're doing what a bee does. You're just taking a little bit from each place. So you'd be like, we're not that hungry. Can we just have a little bit? And they give you a little bit. And then you go to another house. We're not that hungry, just a little bit. And then you go through 5, 8 houses and you get your breakfast. You get your belly filled, but none of them got tapped too big. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's Rangoli in South India, where the culture is to really... And so they do these beautiful, sand designs, and they're gone within a couple days, but they'll put hours into making these beautiful designs outside their home to beautify their home. So you're going to clean your house, lamps inside and out to welcome guests and let everybody know you're welcoming them. The word arati, one of our acharyas gives a folk etymology for the meaning of arati. And he says the meaning of arati is aratri. Ratri means night. And so aratri means a light, because a light dissipates the darkness of night. And so an arati is when you take a flame and you offer that to Krishna, and you dissipate the darkness of ignorance which separates you and God, and the darkness of ignorance in your heart, so that you can see Krishna who's there. Sanatana Goswami gives this explanation of arti. And so Diwali is you put a bunch of lights in your house, front and back, you buy new pots, you close your books out, you've harvested enough grains, you're giving sweets to people, you're showing love for family members, jewelry for the wife, feed your brother, like actually put food in his mouth. That's like the thing you do. And then people travel and see family members. You ward off some evil, and you celebrate. And if you're from a Vaishnava tradition, like ours, then there's some special things like Govardhan Puja, which is happening tomorrow that we'll get into then. But the most popular part of Diwali is the diya, or the deepa, that lamp. And that lamp has two main stories that go with it. The Pandavas coming back home, or Ram coming back. And of the two, Ram coming back home is the vastly more popular one. That's kind of been universally accepted by Hindus as what's going on. You learning something? You are, right? You didn't know all this, did you? Huh? It said all indicated. Yeah. You're learning something? Right? See, he's more cultured than you are. You want to not admit your ignorance. He wants to overestimate his ignorance. You see that? There's a saying in Bengali, Ati Bhakti Chor Lakhan. Ati Bhakti Chor Lakhan. You know what that means?
The thief will steal if you have enough love.
Ati Bhakti. Too much devotion. Chor Lakshana. Sign of a thief. In Bengali it becomes Lakhan. Too much devotion is the sign of a thief. You get all like disciple-y with me sometimes. But if I just put a little pressure, your ego comes out. See that? You put a little pressure on a real devotee, and their humility comes out. With most of us, you put a little pressure, and your ego comes out. Heavy, huh? Ati Bhakti Chor Lakhan. Be wary of people who pretend to be super devout. They usually have an ulterior motive. There's something in it for them. I'm not hating on you too big, but you did just get chastised. Lucky you got brown skin, so if you turn red, people won't be able to tell. Prabhupada was highly critical of Durga Puja and Diwali, which is super unusual. You wouldn't expect that. But if you understand, Prabhupada's from Bengal, where the Vaishnavas do not celebrate Durga Puja, and when Diwali isn't about Lakshmi and Ram at all, it's all about Durga and Kali and killing animals, then you can understand why that festival would be super unpopular in his book, because of his experience with it. You follow? And in fact, the other thing I want to get into for a moment is, it's not that Prabhupada was just, my God is better than your God. You know, it's like, oh, I worship Shiva and you worship Krishna. It's not just some arbitrary, my God versus your God. What we're against is materialism towards the deity. If you look at Kali Puja and the kind of songs which are sung, if you look at the bhajans dedicated to Durga, they have two features. Number one, they are actually impersonal. They believe that the deity disintegrates in due course of time and you ultimately become one with the deity. Therefore, it may be bhakti in form, but it's not bhakti in substance. Because bhakti means you love somebody and you want to serve Krishna. If you believe that Krishna doesn't really exist and everything's going to merge and become one, then whatever tears you cry of devotion are really crocodile tears that will give way to a Brahmananda, a merging and becoming one with the deity. That's one flavor that the songs and poems and scriptures about the goddess, that's one feature of them. The other one is that there's a whole undercurrent of materialism where you ask for stuff. So this whole thing with Lakshmi Puja, worshipping Lakshmi Devi, or Durga Puja, or Kali Puja, or any of the celebrations of Diwali, in most Hindus' mind, it's about minimizing their exposure to negativity and then increasing their prosperity. You follow? They have this idea. Like, even with like the serving sadhus, it's understood if you serve a holy man, then you get like so much wealth and so much blessings. And so even sometimes when people want to serve you, they're really thinking it's going to, in their selfish best interest to serve you. It's a very elevated and elegant and refined form of materialism. But deep down in people's hearts, they're thinking, I will do this ritual, I will serve this holy person, I will observe this ritual, and I will make money and become prosperous. Both ideas, number one, merging into and becoming one with the deity, and number two, thinking about what's in it for me. Both those ideas are fundamentally repugnant to and incompatible with our basic theology. Like 101, like what, you've been around a couple of years? So in my book, you're a newbie. You've been around a couple of years, it's like you're brand spanking new. Like, if you're around like less than a decade, you're a newbie in my book. You know? Because less than a decade, you can bounce. You get in the 10 to 20 year range, the odds start to get stacked that you're going to stick around for a lifetime. You start clocking 20, 30 years, it starts to become written in stone that you're not going anywhere. But even as is the brand spanking new, wet behind the ears, Hare Krishna, you understand so well how repugnant impersonalism and materialism is in relationship to the deity, right? You can appreciate how fundamentally at odds with our basic theology these things are, right? Because we train you in this stuff from day one because it's our core identity. We love God forever. And we just want to serve. And we're not asking what's in it for me. I mean, Daruka, Krishna's charioteer, was fanning Krishna and he was crying tears of ecstasy, and he became disturbed that his tears of ecstasy were making it more difficult for him to fan Krishna with a steady hand. And so he cursed his ecstatic love for Krishna because it was getting in the way of his steady service to Krishna. If you want to see how deep the rabbit hole goes, you cry a few tears of like, for Krishna, you're thinking it's like the most magical thing in the world. You have a dream about the deity, you cry some tears, you become overwhelmed and stunned with emotion towards Krishna. You're thinking like it's all about that. Then usually you're hoping somebody's looking at you so they can see how advanced you are. But even you get over that, still you're relishing so much that sweet feeling for Krishna. For Daruka, that was a terrible thing because it got in the way of a steady, unfailing, unflinching service. So these two things are repugnant. That's why Prabhupada was so critical. It's not just that it was like one god versus another. It's not just the gory ritual, although that's enough. But it's rather the basic diametrically opposed theology that was associated with the festival and the celebration of the festival. This gets articulated really nicely in the 4th verse of a song that we're going to sing in a few minutes. Vadam deva mokshang na moksha avadingva. Varam means boon. Deva moksham. Varam deva moksham. Moksha avadingva nacha Varam deva moksha na moksha avadingva nachanyam vrineham nacha anyam vrineham vadeshat api iha. The boon of liberation, or even the boon beyond liberation, what to speak of anything in this world, I don't ask any of that from you, O Lord, from you who can give any benediction. Varesha is the giver of benedictions. You are the giver of benedictions. But I'm not going to ask you for liberation or even moksha avadin, even the thing beyond liberation. What to speak of anya, iha, other things in this world. Navrineham. I don't ask that from you. Deva, Lord, Varesha, O Lord, who can give any benediction. I don't ask for any of that from you. Idam te vapur nata gopala balam. This form of yours as a cowherd boy. Idam te, your. Idam te vapur nata. O Lord, this form of yours. Idam te vapur nata. Gopala balam. This form of yours as a child protecting the cows. Sada me manasya virastam kimanyaya. Let my mind always just be absorbed in that. Kimanyaya. What else? Kimanyaya literally means what else? But in context, what it means in Sanskrit is it means Kimanyaya. What else could I ever want? What else do I need? You can see in this verse a critique of materialism. I don't want liberation from you. If there's something beyond liberation, I don't want that either. What to speak of something else in this, like some paltry, petty material thing, like a spouse or a family or a career or fame or wealth. I'm not even going to bother mention those things. Are all called anya. It's like other things, api, even other, like what to speak of other things in this world. I'm not even going to bother mentioning that stuff because I don't even want this stuff up here. So I'm never going to mention any of these petty things. Got it? You follow? That's the critique of materialism. Then what do I want? I just want to see this form of yours. This beautiful form of Krishna. That fulfills all my desires. What else could I want? There's nothing else to want. Sada me manasya virasam. Let my mind always remain entranced by that. And that's the permanence of bhakti. the permanence of the relationship between the soul and the deity, a relationship of love and service. So you find in this single verse a critique of the impersonalism as well as the materialism, which is woven into the celebration of Diwali for almost 1 billion people. Now, if we remove those elements and we use this day or any day as a day to remember Krishna, some wonderful thing Krishna did. For us, the big thing that happens on Diwali that nobody even talks about is Krishna stole butter from his mother and was bound by his mother on this day. And that happened on Deepavali. For us, the whole month is blessed. Our whole month, we don't even call the month Kartik. We call the month Damodar. The Vaishnavas renamed the month. The month is called Damodar. We renamed the month. The month is named after Damodar. This pastime took place. The whole month, we sing this song, we offer a lamp to Krishna, and we think about the meaning of these verses. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu celebrated Deepavali. So there's nothing wrong with celebrating it. And I don't think we would displease Srila Prabhupada. But we have to remove these unsavory elements to make sure that they're not present in the songs we sing, in the rituals we do, in the way we think, in our meditation, in our verses. So that's it. It's kind of all things Diwali. Little Cheech and Chong's thrown in there. Cognitive dissonance. The meat paradox. Animal sacrifice. You know? Etymology. And an attempt to, in a sustained way, critique another tradition, not for the fact that they're different than us, but because of the actual substance of what they're teaching. Does that make sense? You can level critique. My guru, when he was getting his PhD in religion, that Prabhupada told him to get, he wrote a critique of a philosopher named Charles Hartshorne, who passed away in 2002. Very, very famous philosopher, kind of a disciple, follower of Alfred North Whitehead, extremely important philosopher, maybe the most important philosopher in the last century. You've heard of him. And so Alfred North Whitehead was responsible for process theory, and then that was turned into a natural theology and a process theology by Charles Hartshorne. And my guru wrote a critique of him, and Charles Hartshorne wrote back to him and said, so many people critique me, but none of them even understand me. He says, this is the first dissertation I've seen where the person actually understood my ideas and engaged with them. And so I said, I have to take your critique more seriously. So it's not just a question, if you want to critique somebody, it's okay. If you want to critique something, it's okay. You have to actually understand what's going on and be able to point to some non-arbitrary critique. You have to be able to unpack it and dissect it and really point out where things diverge. And then you're not just a hater, you're a thinker. And you've actually honored that person by taking the trouble to understand where they're coming from. Our critique of Diwali is our critique of materialism. Our critique of Diwali is our critique of impersonalism. Our critique of the other gods and goddesses worshipped is because they're just cutouts for an impersonal conception of divinity that rears its non-existent head in due course of time. You get that? I was trying to be witty. Non-existent because it's impersonal. And so, yeah, anyway, there's all things Diwali for you. I think the clock is up on me, so I'm getting like the cane. All right, so that's it. We're done. We can ixnay IGTV. Any comments? Yes.